Blessings. Good evening to you all. It's nice to be back here again, in Bodhipala Monastery. Could also say it's nice to be back here to meditate together, chant together, listen to the Dhamma. Because this is the way for us to improve ourselves, bring our minds in line with truth, which is the Buddhist way out of suffering, out of stress. One who cultivates this path, it's called the noble path, the noble eightfold path. They're bringing their mind in line with truth, because this is what liberates us from the causes of suffering. And because you have an interest in that, you're here tonight. Nobody likes stress, suffering, pain, difficulty. But there are many ways people deal with that in life. And some of them are more effective than others. Some things we do to try and reduce our stress, we actually end up making more stress, more suffering for ourselves. But the Buddhist path is a tried and tested way to help human beings improve and get beyond their suffering. And everything falls in line with the Four Noble Truths. Whenever you're in doubt, practicing what the Buddha taught you, you come back to these four basic noble truths. There's suffering, which is to be known. There's the cause of suffering, to be abandoned. The cessation of suffering is to be realized. And there's the path leading to the cessation of suffering, which is to be cultivated. That in itself is a message, you could say a message of hope, because even though there is stress and suffering in our lives, there's the cessation of suffering. They're equally valid, they're equally true. If the Buddha had only stopped at the first noble truth, or even just the first and second noble truth, we'd be in trouble. There's suffering, there's the cause of suffering. That's the end of it. Then we'd be left hanging. What do we do about it? Because we've got the cessation of suffering, and there's a path leading to the cessation of suffering. That gives us some hope and a method. But that's what we have to take away and practice, cultivate for ourselves. And even though it's challenging, that's what we're here for. And that's why we return to a monastery or a place of practice. That's one of the values of a monastery, is a place you can keep returning to remind you of the teachings, to meet with fellow practitioners, whether it's Sangha or laity, and keep coming back to the path of practice, because we forget. That's one of the results of suffering. The first noble truth is it feeds more ignorance and misunderstanding and confusion in our lives. When we have suffering and we're not yet aware of it or understand how to deal with it, then it tends to just breed more suffering. And then we forget even to practice, forget that there is a way out of suffering, forget the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, forget the Noble Eightfold Path. We're great at forgetting, losing our way. We might not realize it, but one of the things you notice when you come to meditate or practice is how easily you forget things. So when we practice meditation, breathing meditation, only takes a few seconds, a few moments before you realize it, how easily you forget the breath. You lose your mindfulness of the breathing. But again, the good news and the message of hope is, well, just as you can forget the breath and become unmindful and lost in distraction, well, distraction can also come to an end, and you can come back to mindfulness, back to the breath. Equally true, equally possible. And the Buddha would often use these kind of opposites just to help make his point, explain the truth to us and remind us, just as there is suffering, there's the end of suffering. Just as there is distraction, there is non-distraction. Just as there is greed, there is contentment. Just as there is anger, there is kindness and compassion. And as we reflect more on that and practice more some of this wisdom and understanding, it can stick in your mind and point you in the right direction when you do fall into suffering. You start looking around for the way out of suffering, but in a correct way, because if you've heard the teachings before, you've got some basic knowledge, understanding of how to practice, and then it can simply be a matter of coming back to practice or put into practice what you've heard before, what you've done before that worked. And you gain some cumulative understanding that some of that doesn't disappear, even though we still have moments where we lose our awareness, lose our understanding, get caught into suffering again. Maybe it's not quite as long as it used to be before you come out of that suffering and start to bring up the Dhamma again, the truth, come back to the truth. Like when you're meditating, you see that your mind wanders away, lost in its thoughts, trains of thought. Eventually, you remind yourself, come back to the breath. So the Buddha said we have to make this effort to learn and study about what dukkha, what suffering is, in order to understand where it comes from and how to end it. As we know, we chant every morning, not getting what you want is suffering. Being with what you don't want is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Not getting your wishes fulfilled is suffering. In brief, these 5 aggregates are suffering. When we cling to them, we cling to the body without mindfulness, without wisdom and understanding, it brings us suffering. Cling to feelings of pleasure and pain, suffering. Perceptions, memories, we cling to them, we suffer. Cling to our thoughts and thought formations, we suffer. When we cling to sense consciousness, we suffer. The important thing is the clinging, the attachment. So another way of describing the Dhamma is it's that which brings us to abandon or go beyond clinging and attachment. So the nature of seeing the truth is liberating it. It liberates us from clinging and attachment. And that takes effort. And we have to keep coming back to cultivating this path, particularly the path of mindfulness, wise reflection, coming back to look at our experience and notice where we are clinging, where we are attaching. Where there's suffering, there's attachment. Where there's attachment, there's suffering. And they tend to go together. You look at this body, as a human being, we're growing older every day, and with aging brings its own problems. Our body never does exactly what we want it to do, never looks quite like we want it to look, never feels quite like we want it to feel. We get some pleasure, but we also get some pain with this body. That's something the Buddha encouraged us to investigate, to look at and understand more deeply. Practice mindfulness directed to our physical body. You question it, investigate it, try and get to see its true nature, because that's where you can understand clinging and then let go of clinging. Because if you can see the nature of the body is actually just following the laws of nature, subject to aging, sickness, ultimately to death, then you see that if you cling to this body, you'll try and control it, want it to be a certain way, then you'll suffer. If you can understand it as impermanent, as we were just chanting, the nature of the body, it's impermanent, changing. That understanding is what frees your mind from attachment. So we have these phrases we use in Buddhism. We say, bring your mind to see it's just the way it is, just the way things are. So even those things that you don't want, if you can see that's just the way things are, then the attachment starts to drop away. None of us want to get older. We'd all like to stay at a perfect age, perfect state of health, physical fitness. But it's just the way things are. We get older every day. Somebody who sees that, then they accept the truth, then they let go of that clinging. They're less deluded. But when we don't investigate, we tend to always be lost in our view of how this body belongs to me, and so it should go according to how I want it to be. I want it to look a certain way, feel a certain way, be healthy. So we're always getting disappointed, irritated, depressed, sad. That's what attachment brings. But when you see the way things are, you know the way things are, you say, oh, it's like this. And there may be periods where your body is healthy and looks good, and you can appreciate that, and your body can do all kinds of good things for you, take you around, give you all kinds of enjoyment and pleasure in life, and get work done, get things done. But at the same time, if your view is in line with the truth, with the Dhamma, you also know that it's constantly changing. And you know that's just the way it is. It's just the way things are. Seeing just the way things are doesn't mean to say you want to hasten the aging of the body, or you want it to get sick or have aches and pains, or you want to feel hungry or feel hot, feel cold. But when it happens, you know this is just the way things are. That's the mind of non-attachment. Mindfulness and wisdom is looking at the way things are and saying, yeah, this is how it is. It might not be exactly what I want, but I have to accept it because it's the way things are. How much of our stress is born out of not accepting the way things are. Half the time we're sort of saying, it should be like this, it shouldn't be like that. This should not happen to me, this should not happen to the people I love. But if it's just the way things are, ultimately we have to bring our mind to accept that, and know that, and see that. And that's where the attachment drops away, and we just know our mind comes more in line with truth. It's just the way things are. And these 5 khandhas are a basis for clinging or attachment. They're all the same, in the same way. There's the physical body, and then there's the 4 mental khandhas. Feeling and memory, they don't last. They're not, you don't just have one feeling all day long, pleasure all day long, much as we'd like that. Attachment says, I am attaching to this pleasure, I want this pleasure, I want to keep it as long as possible, but it gradually changes. Whatever pleasant, happy experience you have, it gradually fades. If you can see that that's just the way things are, then you can still enjoy the pleasurable experience, but you also know at the same time it won't last. So when things change, you know, that's just the way things are. You eat the nice food, enjoy the pleasure of the taste, and then that food fills you up and you stop eating, and the pleasure of eating ends. We see that every day, but whether we reflect on it or not, it's a different matter. It's quite often we're eating without much mindfulness, so we just attach to tastes and smells and colors of food and types of food. But if you bring mindfulness and wisdom up, then you can still enjoy your food, but you just know it's just the way things are. You eat and then it's over. There's the start and then it's the finish. What arises must cease. Pleasant feelings arise, pass away. The sight, smell, touch, taste arises, pass away. That's like a familiar friend or a familiar theme that you start noticing in your life, the way things arise and cease. And it's bringing your mind in line with the truth. That's just the way things are. Sometimes you might think, well, this is a bit of a depressing thought, or it takes away some of the fun of life, the enjoyment of life. But of course, that enjoyment, if it's coming from a place of delusion or attachment, then it's actually laying the causes for your suffering again. And we cling on to pleasure, and then we get disappointed when it's gone. But if you have this awareness of it's just the way things are, things arise, things cease, they pass away, then those pleasurable feelings are just the way they are. When they arise, they have their causes and conditions, and they're there for a while, and then they pass away. And you can accept it. So then you're letting go of attachment. You don't create any stress or suffering out of the fact that that's just the way things are. Things arise and pass away. You could say it's actually an act of kindness or compassion to bring up this simple reflection on change or impermanence, to help remove some of the clinging and attachment we have in the mind. So as long as we attach to things, then we keep falling into frustration and disappointment. It's like a tool that serves us well. You can keep coming back to this reflection, just establishing mindfulness and observing arising, passing away. Thoughts are the same. Your feelings are one thing, thoughts are another. You don't just have one thought in your mind all day long. much as we might try to achieve that sometimes. Your mental landscape is constantly changing. Thoughts, trains of thoughts arise, pass away. Very mundane thoughts, very sophisticated, exalted thoughts, and very gross, very coarse thoughts. But if you keep watching, one thing that becomes clear is that thought in its nature, or we say mental formation, sankharas, they arise, they pass away. That's just the way things are. So it brings a certain detachment, this detached awareness, just seeing the way things are, helps to break through some of the delusions where you cling on. When we're deluded, we make a big deal out of everything. Everything becomes very important in the mind. So every thought becomes really important. And of course, if that thought is bringing with it a lot of stress, negative emotion, we suffer. Or even if it's a very pleasant thought or very useful thought, it's still subject to change. It doesn't last, it arises, ceases. And we can accept that fact. The more detached awareness you have towards thoughts, well then instead of just being a slave to thoughts and always being pushed around by them, trying to develop the good ones and hold on to them, get rid of the negative ones, you can use thought more as a tool to understand things, learn things, understand things more deeply, help yourself, help other people. Thought is a useful tool. But when we attach to it, we suffer. It's just a thought, and it's just the way things are. Thoughts come and go, prompted by different causes and conditions. And obviously these 5 khandhas the Buddha talked about, they're all arising and passing away at the same time, influence each other. So, a feeling will prompt a thought, pleasant feeling, a whole set of pleasant thoughts, a negative feeling, painful feeling, a whole set of negative thoughts will reflect that. And perceptions are feeding the thought processes as well. Positive and negative perceptions. Perception is the importance you give to something. The way you remember things, the way you describe things in your mind from those memories, and then the importance you give. But at the same time, if you can bring up mindfulness and reflect, thoughts are just thoughts. Perceptions are just perceptions. Just the way they are. They arise, they pass away. Then there's that understanding in the background of your mind, so you don't get so lost in the thoughts, the perception, the view, the viewpoint that you're holding on to that may be feeding a lot of discontent, dissatisfaction. How often we do that with our life, to do with our relationships, our money, our political views about ourselves, who we think we are, who we want to be. In the end, it's all just thought, isn't it? Thought arising, passing away. That's why coming back to the breath can be so liberating when we are suffering. You come back to the breath. It's just one breath in, one breath out. Brings you down to earth again, doesn't it? And it can cut off a train of thought. If you are feeling very stressed or worried, anxious, you come back to the breath, you take a few deep breaths. That feeling of stress, anxiety passes away quite quickly. If you do that sincerely, maybe it returns, the trains of thought often return there because of the attachment, the strength of the attachment, or we keep falling back into old habit patterns. But if you also see that you can interrupt them and break them up, then it can give you a new perspective. And you see, oh, it's just a thought. It's not the end of the world. It's fueled by we say old karma. I've thought like this before, so that's part of the conditioning process why I think like this again and again and again. And that's another part of attachment, isn't it? If you cling to something, then you keep feeding it, keep holding on. But if you see what you're doing, bring up a bit more mindfulness, reflect on the process, then you can see that, well, if I change this thought, let it go, then I'm weakening the process of clinging. So particularly with the trains of thought of suffering, anger and worry, you can see there's a way out of them by undermining them or weakening them, bringing up mindfulness. And the whole point of this practice is you're training the mind is you can let go of things. It's possible. We have that potential. Sometimes in life you have to go to an extreme first before you see the suffering, and then you're willing to try to let go. Or just going to the extreme helps you to let go. Like in the old days in Thailand, we used to do a practice in the middle of the hot season. We used to go into the meditation hall in the middle of the day when you just had your meal. And we only eat one meal a day as monks. And so your stomach is full and you're trying to digest your food, and the weather is really hot, 35, 38 degrees maybe, depending. You go into the meditation hall and shut all the windows or doors, and you put all your robes on. And before you were thinking it was hot, maybe even complaining, oh, this weather is so hot, and you're sweaty, and your clothes are sweaty, and you feel tired, sleepy. And then you sit for an hour in the heat inside the hall with the windows shut and all your robes on, and it gets really hot, like a sauna. But then after you've done that, you come out again, you take your robes off, and you're out in the weather that was previously hot. And then suddenly it feels a lot cooler than it used to, because you've gone up to an extreme, then you come back down again. It's a bit like getting ill. When you get ill, nobody likes getting ill because you feel weak, painful, discomfort. Maybe you have a fever or aches and pains or different symptoms. When you recover from your illness, and then your good health seems so good, doesn't it? Because you went to an extreme of discomfort. It's the same thing. When we go to an extreme and then come back to what is normal, then what is normal starts to feel good. But when we're clinging and not very mindful, even what's normal is often the cause of suffering. We're dissatisfied again. So a lot of suffering in life is just relative, isn't it? It's relative to your situation, and then how your mind is in that situation. We have to learn from that. The only way to really get beyond clinging and attachment is learn about it, learn where it comes from, see how it causes suffering, and then see how you can let go. It's a learning experience, and often the suffering and stress we experience is the learning. That's where you learn. It's like your teacher. And if you practice enough, you might even get to the point where you see suffering is a teacher, so you welcome a bit of suffering. It's not that you want to create suffering out of nothing, but when it does happen, you welcome it because you know you can learn from it. If you really learn, then it doesn't make that experience of whatever it was, won't make you suffer again, because you've been through it and you know how to let go. So all the mistakes and the failures in life, all the painful feelings in our legs when we meditate, or all the difficulties in relationships, other people misunderstanding us, saying things we don't agree with, criticizing us, things going wrong here, things going wrong there. All of this can teach us to see this is just the way things are, and then let go of the attachment. As long as there's attachment, you have a voice saying this shouldn't happen, this is not right, it shouldn't be like this. That so much of our suffering is just the creation of the mind, giving too much importance to a certain train of thought, a certain negative emotion. We have to go through it sometimes to see it, understand it, and then let go. And then the mind, if your mind's truly let go, then you just know, oh, that's just the way it is. It's just the way things are. And the mind is quiet. Sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't. Well, it's like that young boy who had the illness, the digestive illness, had all this pain in his stomach. So he had to go and stay in the Royal Children's Hospital for many months, trying to fix it. Lots of pain, discomfort, couldn't digest his food, so he lost weight, became very weak. It wasn't like he was going to die, it was just a problem that the doctors were trying to fix. So he's in a ward with all these other kids who, some of them were dying of cancer. But every day he was in there, he was so annoyed. He was only about 16, all his mind was saying, I should be out of here, I should be playing footy with my friends, I should be doing everything I want to do, I'm just stuck in this hospital, bored, fed up. So he's so angry and complaining every day. His mum and dad would rush home from work to go and see him in the hospital. And he'd just complain, blame them, and blame the hospital, blame the doctors, blame everybody, because he was so unhappy with his situation. After a few months, there was a day when this mum and dad were late because there was so much traffic. They were really late, an hour late. He's waiting there for them. So when they're supposed to have turned up, they hadn't turned up yet. He immediately went into a rage. He was sitting on his bed. Where are they? Getting upset. But because they hadn't arrived, he had no choice but just to sit with his own bad mood. And normally he had things to distract him, but that day there's no parents turned up, so nothing to distract him. So just sitting there, observing his own bad mood. He's looking around for anything to get out of his own thoughts. And he looked at every kid in the ward, and something dawned on him that, oh, every other kid in this ward is in a worse off position than me. Some of them are almost dying and maybe will die, because he'd seen a few of the kids die. Everyone has more pain, more discomfort. They're more ill than I am. That was his conclusion, looking around the ward he was in. So it finally dawned on him, oh, my situation could be worse. They're all worse off than me. And then the thought came up, oh, I'm actually better off than everyone else. Things aren't as bad as they could be. So he started to feel good. Instead of being really angry, he felt quite good. And he could see, well, his situation wasn't hopeless. He was going to recover. The doctors were saying, you're not going to die from this. You just have to go through treatment and we'll get you out of this. So he started to feel better. So by the time his parents arrived, he felt really good. He was a Buddhist from a Buddhist family, but he hadn't been trained in meditation yet. He was only 16. He just worked it out for himself that if you sit there focusing your mind on what's wrong with your situation, holding on, clinging on to those thoughts, those perceptions, those feelings, everything that's wrong, you'll feel miserable. You know, attachment leads to suffering. You work that out. Whereas when you let go of the negativity and you realize, well, things are bad, but they could be worse. It's like the dark clouds lift in the sky, the sun or the moon comes through, the light shines, so you feel a bit better. He understood that point. So his whole life in the hospital changed from that day. He stopped being quite so angry. And his parents came to see him and they said, how come you're not so angry today? What happened? They wanted to know why he wasn't angry, because he'd been so angry up to that point. He just said, oh, I just realized I'm not that badly off. Could be worse. That's like the natural wisdom, but that's what the Buddha was kind of putting down in when he talked about the Four Noble Truths. It's basically getting this natural wisdom that can free a human mind from suffering by seeing the way things are, letting go of attachment. We've all got it. It's just we often forget to apply it, or we don't realize that we've got it, and we don't know how to harness this wisdom. But it's there for us. You know, everyone has the potential. They've got intelligence. And most of the time when we're suffering, we're blaming other people, aren't we? We're blaming someone out there, looking outside of ourselves for the cause of it, how to end it, blaming someone. It's only when you start to establish mindfulness and you look back at your mind, then you realize, actually, this is the source of the suffering. Holding on to the negative thoughts. If you can let them go, let them be, life improves straight away. You know, a thought can be let go of in one instant. A negative perception about something can be let go of. The attachment to an unpleasant feeling can be abandoned straight away. In one moment, one finger snap can be done, but we have to practice it. And we have to apply the mind to do that. And you have to turn your attention inwards. You know? This is the beauty or the benefit of mindfulness, is you're turning your attention around to look at your own mind rather than getting lost out there in all the things of the world and your thoughts and perceptions about the world. You're seeing a thought as a thought, something that arises, passes away. Feeling is feeling, rises, passes away. Takes your mind to a higher level, a higher awareness. And that's why you can get beyond stress and suffering, if only for a few moments. But if you keep doing it, you get better at it. You could say the Buddha or an enlightened person is just someone who keeps doing it to the point where they've done it to perfection. They no longer get lost in those thoughts that feed stress and suffering. They see them for what they are. So they're free, they're liberated. So a few reflections tonight on the Four Noble Truths, and I'll leave them there for your contemplation.
หันธรรมยังโอวาทคาถาสาธุคารังทัตมะเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอะนะโมตามิ